Hey everyone, my name is Carthago Nova. Not really, that would be unfortunate. In these series of videos, we are going to look at interpretations of mythology in order to better understand their meaning. Today's video, we're going to be diving into myth as a history. This is thought to be the oldest of all the interpretations we will cover, and suggests that any given legend recounts events that actually happened in the past, albeit embellished over time. Gods and mysticism have been added for artistic flair. Wow! As we explore these interpretations, we will soon find that not one interpretation truly fits the bill, but they are all equally valid. Enough talk. Let's have a sneeze. First myth, let's go. We open near a sparkling river. A young lady working beside her station temple of Hera. As she was the high priestess of this temple, we can imagine she was working in accordance with her duties, officiating the day's rituals, sacrifices, and most importantly, maintaining the cult statue. Very important to note, that river from earlier that you've probably already forgotten about, well, that's her dad. And so by that very parentage, we might assume that our young lady is partly divine. Yes, but not quite. She is a naiad, a river nymph by the name of Io. Now, we aren't the only ones who have noticed Io. Up on high, we have that rascal Zeus going about his day. What's the story, Wishbone? Haha, I love that puppy. He notices Io and jumps on down. Does his Zeus thing, nobody is surprised. Hera, back up on Olympus, is looking for her devious hubby, and notices down on Earth a clumping of clouds obscuring her view. Hera pops on down, Zeus turns Io into a cow to save face, and Hera smells something fishy and demands to keep it. To make a short story even shorter, Zeus has Hermes break the cow out of its captivity, and Hera in retaliation has a gadfly bite Io's bovine butt all the way to Egypt, where she is then thought to restore back to a human form and become Isis, wife of the mythic god king of Egypt, Osiris. So then, how do we make this Io myth into a history? Well, let's suppose instead that Io was a ship full of Greek travellers that sailed all around the Mediterranean. One day, due to unforeseen circumstances, they found themselves trapped in Egypt, where they then went on to diffuse Greek culture and tradition into Egypt. That this tale could be a genesis of Greek and Egyptian relations. So then we might be asking, where's Zeus? And I don't exactly believe this myself, but this is the process in turning a myth into a historical narrative. This framework was used by the father of history himself, Herodotus. In his famous book, aptly named Histories, he sought to detail the origins and subsequent consequences of Greek and Persian hostilities, along with several other things. Great book. Let's see how he rationalized the Io myth.
Persian learned men say that the Phoenicians were the cause of the dispute. Phoenicians came to Argos seeking trade. Upon selling most of their wares, they decided to abduct some women. Among the women abducted was Io, daughter of the king Inachus, who was the river god in our mythology. It is this way, so saith the Persians, that this is how Io came to Egypt. And the Persians then remark this as the first wrongdoing the Greeks had done.
First and foremost, Herodotus did not even have any Persian sources. That part is made up. That didn't stop the guy, however. He went on to talk about 3 more myths, those being the myths of Europa, Medea, and Helen of Troy, whom were all women snatched away in their respective myths. He says that these 3 women went on to be the arbiters of the Persian and Greco wars, that the Greeks and Persians stole women from each other, and that this was the reason why the Persians and the Greeks had their conflicts. And again you ask, where's Zeus? And that is precisely our issue here. Where is the cow? Where are the gods? Where is the magic? By just removing the gods and the magic does not make this a historical account, and yet it still breaks that barrier and becomes a history, as we've seen with our man Herodotus here. Enter Professor Hammond, author of one of the most widely read and reprinted books on Greek history. He wrote the following on a gentleman named Hylas. But the curious thing about Hylas is that he is a part of the Heraclidae, one of the mythical sons of Heracles, so his existence is debated, and he sits on that hazy line between mythology and history. Now here we have a real date and a real location. So by believing this account, we then believe that Hylas is real, which then means that Hylas's father is real, which of course then means that Hylas's father's father, Zeus, is real. We have in effect made myth real within our history. Now you might be thinking, yeah, seems pretty legitimate, and you'd have at least one person agreeing with you. That man's name was Humerus of Mycenae. Now he lived way back in 300 BCE, in Greece. And the idea basically goes as this. What if you have the gods, and then squish them down to human scale? That possibly the kings from a bygone era that no one remembers anymore once required the divinations that you'd typically give to a god, and then posthumously they themselves were deified, and that those people, Zeus, Hera, etc., were once humans that are now gods. Now, moving on. What is the meat and potatoes of historicized myth? The Bible? Get out of here, what are you, 15? Actually, no, you might be right. Any case, we're going to talk about Troy and the Trojan War, most famously written about by Homer in his work of poetry, the Iliad, and of course by other ancient sources as well. Now, how truly fantastic it must have been when Heinrich Schliemann excavated the dirt, really dug down deep in there, and brought myth into the realm of man. Schliemann's claim to fame is the finding of and excavation of the ancient city of Troy. Or so it's thought. Now, this site was located in the coastal area in Turkey, known as Hisarlik, or Place of Fortresses. Now, I'm not going to get too far into what Schliemann possibly did right or wrong in his career as a hobbying archaeologist. However, I will say some things of note that give some historicity to the Trojan War. Further inland, up into the Hittite city known as Boghaz Köi, we have uncovered letters that refer to people known as the Ahiyawa, or the Achaewoi. Now, looking into the Iliad, we see that Homer refers to these ancient Greeks that fought the Trojans as the Achaeans, so we can hear some resemblance in its pronunciation. Further Hittite records talk of a site known as Wilusa. Again, looking at Homer, we know Troy is referred to as Ilios, the W sound being lost in the Hittite pronunciation. And finally, a man named Alexandrus is also mentioned. In Homer's version, Paris, the instigator of the war, is known as Alexandros. So by looking at the sources, we can see that the events of the Iliad happened in some capacity within the region. But then when we head back to the city of Troy, where it is believed to be in Turkey, it is so hard to see it in the grandeur that Homer had described it. The site itself is so small that no one could have really lived there, let alone be besieged for 10 long years.
What is this? A center for ants!
Alright, so let's quickly take one more look at our source, Homer. Can I please have Homer, please? Oh, there you are, buddy. No, you're not in trouble. Come on. There we go. You know I love you. Mwah, mwah, mwah. I wanna kiss you. Mwah, mwah, mwah. You smell like country buffet. So Homer, assuming he was actually a real person, was a bard, and he would go around and he would recite these epics by memory and by voice. So then begs the question, over such a long period of time of reciting these works orally, they're bound to change. No one's writing them down, they're just getting passed on from person to person. And yes, we do have evidences of this. Looking again at the Iliad, we have evidence of iron weapons, which is weird because the Battle of Troy, the Trojan War, was a Bronze Age war. They didn't have iron weapons. Further, we have evidence of culture changing around the narrative. For example, in terms of marriage, we have a dowry and we have a bride price. Now, these cultural practices do exist, but they do not exist in the same place at the same time as one another. In the Iliad, they do. Though it's worth mentioning that places mentioned, long extinct in Homer's day, are preserved within the narrative. They are remembered in the capacity in which they were used back in the day that they were existing. So then what do we have when we look at the Iliad, the myth, as a history? What happens when we remove the gods, the rampaging heroes, the mysticism? What do we really get as a historical narrative here? Not much, but we get memories. Memories of an extinct culture, the Mycenaean culture that was completely wiped out at the end of the Bronze Age. Fragments of people, places, long extinct, that we have no other way of interacting with or finding out about, but the Iliad holds some kernels of truth here, for those willing to dig deep enough. Ow, that hurt! Oh, someone's at the door. Who could it be? Oh, it's Cicero. Hey Cicero, how you going?
Cicero, he's in my home, Cicero. What makes it wrong, Cicero? He lives next door, he's old and crabby. So we went for coffee, then he got murdered. He's dead, Cicero.
Do you have something to tell us?
Yes.
There are three categories of truth that reside within a narrative-styled retelling: historical, realistic and legendary. Historical narratives are accounts actually performed, albeit long ago from anyone's recollection. Realistic narratives are imaginary but draw upon what we know. In short, it is theoretical. Legendary accounts, like those within myth, are neither true nor probable.
Wow, Cicero, that's really interesting. Let's put you over here so we don't forget. Alright, one more myth before we wrap this up. Where are we? Oh, we're still in Greece. And it's on fire. Okay, what do we have here? Thracians, Sea Peoples, Libyans, Dorians. Oh my. Here we are at the cusp of the Bronze Age collapse. What we know of this period is a bit murky because of the Dark Age that ensued after a lot of these Bronze Age titans were destroyed. It is thought that natural disasters caused famine, which then led to the invasion of migratory tribes, which then in turn caused the Thracians, the Sea Peoples, the Dorians to also migrate downwards in the pursuit of sustenance and land. The Dorians then, after defeating the Mycenaeans, were in a bit of a dilemma. They were in Greece, they had captured the Peloponnese. But for how long? Enter again the myth of the Heraclidae. It is said that before Heracles' birth, Zeus proclaimed before all the gods that whoever should be born on such a date would become the ruler of the Persids, the dynasty founded by Perseus, slayer of the Gorgon Medusa. Hera's cunning caused Heracles' birth to be delayed and hastened the birth of another, Eurystheus, who was born ahead of Heracles and therefore then was granted kingship of the Persids. Heracles is then born into divinity with no earthly claim. Eurystheus, the king who also bestows upon Heracles the 12 labours, eventually has the Heraclidae, the sons of Heracles, banished from the Peloponnese. After Heracles' death, we are left with just the Heraclidae, who forevermore sought to reclaim their divine birthright. According to the narrative, it took several attempts to penetrate the Peloponnese before they actually took it. We remember Hylas dying in one attempt. Which brings us back to the invading Dorians. So what we have here is a charter myth, a myth that seeks to give divine authenticity to the Dorians and their claim over the Peloponnese by connecting them to Heracles and to Zeus. Zeus, within the myth of the Heraclidae, inadvertently states that his son, Heracles, should inherit the throne. Now, come some generations later, the Dorians, the sons of Heracles, are coming to inherit that birthright. The historical narrative depicts desperate invaders, people that don't actually belong to the area, but they are people trying to find a new place to live, trying to provide food for their families. However, the mythic narrative instead depicts that these people are returning sons, people busting open the door and saying, "Hey, Dad said it's my turn on the Xbox." So what have we found here today? History was not always the unmoving behemoth that we know it is today, and myth can be used as a varnish to make any history nice and shiny. So when we look at myth as a historical narrative, we might not always be able to excavate truth and find real historical happenings. Instead, what myth could better be served doing is lending truth to something. Lending truth to something that people of the past thought ought to be propagated, thought ought to be believed. Wait, Cicero, is this what you're talking about the whole time? You little rascal, you!
I must go now. My people need me.
So today we've taken a walk down Mythology Lane, holding hands with history sporadically down the way. Now, I know at the beginning of this episode, I said we'd be looking at mythology as a history. But we've seen so far that history has not always had the stagnant definition we know it to have today. And history does not reveal itself to us, even if we painstakingly remove the gods and the fantastical happenings. But it does give us a window into the time in which these myths were being diffused, not the time in which they are believed to be occurring. Also, we've seen how mythology can be used as a tool to legitimate history. To paraphrase the Augustan historian Livy, "For what happened before the founding of Rome is more fitted to adorn the creation of the poet than the authentic records of the historian. By intermingling human actions with the divine, they may confer a more august dignity on the origin of states." So what do we truly get when we look at mythology as a history? We get the hopes, dreams, aspirations, memories of a large community from a bygone era. Hey there, how you doing? So I really hope that you enjoyed today's video. What this video is, and what the other ones coming after this will be, are a sort of a snapshot of my podcast. Carthago Nova, a trawl through history. Now, within these podcasts, I take the source material so much further and have a much more in-depth sort of analysis of the sources. These videos, on the other hand, are meant to be a little bit more tongue-in-cheek, a little bit more comedic with its approach, which I'm sure that you've seen already. So if you like the content today, first and foremost, consider subscribing, liking, etc., etc. But also consider having a look at my podcast as well. Again, I go so much deeper within the podcast. I left so much out in this video to just try to make it shorter. And it's still like 20 minutes long. Oh my gosh, I wanted it to be 10 minutes. But we'll see how the other videos go in the future. But in any case, YouTube, meant to be more tongue-in-cheek, fun in its approach. Podcast, more academic, more dusty bin, if you're into that. So either or, I hope to see you guys all in the future. It's been an absolute pleasure making this video for you guys, and yeah, have a good one, and I'll see you next time. This has been Carthago Nova, Troll Through History. Just one thing I forgot to mention really quickly, this first video, as well as the first podcast, couldn't have been done without the research and impassioned oration by one Professor Ian Plant. Here is his textbook right here. Now, I swear I do own it, it's just that I'm in Japan at the moment. I'm kind of trapped here. Send help. Bye!